about 10 years ago, martial arts was outlawed in Russia.
Well, this brings up something. You were in one of Bruce Lee's great movies. Yeah. And this is a famous fight scene.
The internet says Chuck Norris can slam a revolving door. Bruce Lee's fans say he was a near supernatural force that no human being could have matched. Both of those things are stories people agreed to believe in, and both of them are completely wrong. What actually happened between these two men, what they said to each other, trained together, and possibly did to each other in private, is far more interesting than any legend. The world just lost Chuck Norris. The news broke on the morning of Friday, March 20th, 2026, and for a few hours, the internet simply stopped. His family posted a statement to his Instagram account that was brief and careful, and devastatingly final. It read, "It is with heavy hearts that our family shares the sudden passing of our beloved Chuck Norris yesterday morning. While we would like to keep the circumstances private, please know that he was surrounded by his family and was at peace." It hit hard because of what had happened just 9 days earlier.
Breaking news in the United States, where legendary action star and martial artist Chuck Norris has died.
The 86-year-old passing away suddenly after being taken to hospital in Hawaii.
Looks back at his extraordinary life.
On March 10th, 2026, Chuck Norris celebrated his 86th birthday in Hawaii by posting a video of himself in a boxing sparring session, moving well, throwing combinations, grinning at the camera. At the end of the clip, he looked directly into the lens and said, "I do not age, I level up." The internet shared it everywhere. It became a trending moment. Everyone watched it and felt the same thing, which was that this man was simply not going to stop. Then, on March 19th, he was hospitalized on the island of Kauai under circumstances his family chose not to disclose and has still not disclosed. A source who had spoken with him the previous day told TMZ that he had been working out and was in an upbeat and jovial mood. There was no warning visible to anyone around him. Then, he was gone. The tributes came in from everywhere. Sylvester Stallone, who worked alongside Norris in The Expendables 2, wrote that Chuck was all-American in every way and a great man. President Trump told reporters that Norris was a tough cookie. The sports world, the martial arts world, and the entertainment industry all paid their respects in the hours that followed. But here is what made this death carry a particular weight that went beyond the loss of a famous person. Chuck Norris had already been carrying enormous grief in the months before he died. His mother, Wilma, the woman he credited across 50 years of interviews with holding the family together through every difficult chapter of his early life, died in 2024. Then, in December 2025, his first wife, Diane Holchek, passed away. Diane was the high school sweetheart he had married in 1958 and spent 30 years raising a family with. He lost his mother and his first wife within a year of each other, and then, less than 4 months after Diane died, Chuck was gone too. Now that he is gone, the stories that were carefully managed while he was alive can finally be told in full. And the most important of those stories, the one that defined more of his life than any film or any title or any meme ever did, is the story of his relationship with a man who died more than 50 years before him and whose shadow never fully left him. That man was Bruce Lee, and the truth of what existed between them, what they built together, what they said about each other, what may have happened between them in private, and how Bruce Lee's death in 1973 at the age of 32 altered the entire direction of Chuck Norris's life, is the story that deserves to be told right now while the world is paying attention. Bruce Lee died at 32. Chuck Norris lived to 86. And in the 53 years between those two deaths, Chuck Norris protected something about their relationship with a silence so deliberate and so consistent that even the people closest to him never got the full truth out of him. Bruce Lee, the force that changed Chuck Norris. The version of Bruce Lee that the world agreed to believe in is a symbol, not a person. He exists on posters as impossibly fast and philosophically perfect, dispensing wisdom about water and empty cups, physically flawless in every frame. The actual Bruce Lee was far more complicated and far more human than any symbol. And the gap between the mythology and the man is where the genuine story lives. He was born Lee Junfan on November 27, 1940 in San Francisco, the same birth year as Chuck Norris, and his family returned to Hong Kong while he was still an infant. His father, Lee Hoi Chuen, was a celebrated Cantonese opera and film star, which meant Bruce grew up in a household organized around performance and public attention. He appeared in nearly 20 Hong Kong films as a child actor before he was old enough to have any complete understanding of what he was doing. The camera already knew him before he knew himself. The real Bruce Lee, growing up in the Kowloon district of Hong Kong, was a street fighter with a genuine and escalating problem. He was involved in gang activity and physical confrontations serious enough to alarm his parents at a fundamental level. His father arranged for him to begin training under Wing Chun master Ip Man, whose school had the structure to redirect what Lee was doing with his aggression. Even within Ip Man's school, there were complications. When certain classmates discovered that Lee had European heritage on his mother's side, they refused to train alongside him. The rejection was personal and sharp. It fed a defiance in Lee that did not fade over time. It deepened into the core of everything he built. In 1959, his parents sent him to America. He settled in Seattle, washed dishes to support himself, and began teaching martial arts wherever he could find people willing to learn. Students were drawn to him almost immediately because what he was teaching was unlike anything American practitioners had encountered. He did not present a fixed system with forms to memorize. He asked his students to examine why each technique existed and what it was actually trying to accomplish. This pursuit of honest, adaptable, practical fighting eventually became Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. It was not a style. It was a philosophy that insisted truth mattered more than tradition. In 1964 in Oakland, Lee crossed paths with a martial artist named Wong Jack Man, who challenged him to a private match. What happened in that room has been disputed for over 60 years. Linda Lee, Bruce's wife, stated he won decisively in under 3 minutes. Wong Jack Man has always described a much longer, far less decisive exchange. The fight was never filmed, and the accounts will never reconcile. What is certain is that the experience ignited something in Lee regardless of the outcome. He felt he had been too slow. He completely rebuilt his entire physical training methodology in response to that feeling. And the machine he built in those months of rebuilding was extraordinary by any measurement. He became Kato on the Green Hornet in 1966, his first major American media presence. But Hollywood's appetite for Asian leading men in 1966 was essentially non-existent. He developed a television concept built around a Chinese-American martial artist in the American West. The show was recast with a white lead and became Kung Fu. The rejection was deep and real. He returned to Hong Kong and became a phenomenon there within months. The Big Boss and Fist of Fury shattered box office records across Asia. He was a superstar on one side of the world, while remaining largely uncelebrated on the other. He had met Chuck Norris at a karate tournament in 1968, and the two of them spent approximately 2 years training together in Norris's backyard in California. Lee was genuinely curious about Norris's tournament background and the competitive experience that he had not come from himself. Norris was absorbing everything Lee showed him about speed and combat philosophy. Each man was making the other more complete. This was not two famous people performing a friendship for an audience. This was two serious students of fighting who found each other intellectually essential. In 1972, Lee called Norris from Hong Kong. He was making a film he had written himself, that he would direct himself, that he would produce himself, and that required one final opponent that an audience would genuinely believe was a mortal threat to him. He had trained with Norris. He had felt what Norris was capable of. There was only one phone call to make. What Bruce Lee built with Chuck Norris inside the Roman Colosseum over the course of one bribed hour became the most studied fight sequence in the history of cinema, and it was made possible by a friendship that produced far more questions than it ever publicly answered. The Colosseum, 10 minutes that defined both men. The Way of the Dragon was produced on a budget of $145,000. Bruce Lee wrote it, directed it, produced it, starred in it, and choreographed every single fight sequence in it. He filmed it partly in Rome with a crew that did not speak Italian, while simultaneously managing the logistics of an international production and performing the physically exhausting lead role at full intensity. It should not have worked. It absolutely worked. Lee chose the Roman Colosseum as the setting for the climactic confrontation because he understood what the location would do to the sequence. Two men settling everything inside the oldest combat arena in the Western world. The problem was that the Italian authorities managing the Colosseum did not issue permits for staged combat. Lee's response was direct and completely unbothered. He found the relevant guards, paid them, and negotiated exactly 1 hour inside the arena. 60 minutes to capture the centerpiece of his entire film. Chuck Norris played Colt, a cold and supremely methodical Western fighter brought in by the film's villains as their absolute final weapon. Despite appearing only in the film's last act with almost no dialogue, Norris received second billing across the entire production. Lee gave him that billing deliberately. The weight of the fight sequence required the audience to understand from the very first moment that Colt was not a minor obstacle to be efficiently dismissed. He was the most dangerous opponent Tang Lung had ever faced. Given who Chuck Norris actually was in the real world, manufacturing that belief was not difficult. The choreography sessions in the weeks before filming were detailed and specific. They worked through every exchange, discussing what each moment was communicating to an audience and how to make the contact appear as real as possible, while managing the risk of genuine injury. In several moments of the final filmed sequence, the contact is real and visible to any careful viewer. This was intentional. Lee's entire philosophy of cinematic combat was built on the idea that the realist version of a thing is always the most compelling version of it. There is one detail from that shoot that became its own piece of lore entirely separate from the film. During the sequence where Norris's character is thrown to the ground, Bruce Lee grabbed the hair on Chuck Norris's chest and pulled it out. Not as a technique. It simply happened in the heat of the moment. Years afterward, Norris shared in an interview that a man wrote to him saying he and his son had watched The Way of the Dragon together 26 times. The man's only question was whether Bruce had really pulled the hair out of his chest. Because if he had, the man wrote, "You are really a stud." Norris confirmed in the interview that it was completely real. NPR's obituary recalled this detail specifically in its tribute to Norris, noting that the film fetishized Norris's hairy chest opposite Lee's smooth one, and that Norris gave a little smirk when he flattened Lee with a roundhouse kick early in the sequence. The film grossed over $60 million worldwide on a production budget of $145,000. Adjusted for today's inflation, that figure surpasses $700 million. It became the highest-grossing film in Hong Kong history at the time of its release and held that record until another Bruce Lee film surpassed it the following year. What makes the Colosseum sequence genuinely irreplaceable is not the technical skill of the performers in isolation. It is the philosophical decision Lee made about how to film it. He shot in long, unbroken takes that required both men to sustain every exchange from beginning to end with no editorial safety net. There was no cutting between close-ups to conceal a mistimed strike or a lost balance. Every error would be permanently visible to every person who ever watched that film. The pressure that creates cannot be simulated. Both men met it completely without flinching. The sequence is still held up by film scholars and martial arts historians as the unrepeatable standard of what choreographed combat can achieve. The reason it has never been surpassed has nothing to do with the technology or budgets available to modern productions. It is because you cannot manufacture two real masters genuinely testing each other under genuine pressure. Everything filmed since has been performance. What happened in that Colosseum was something else. The fight on screen was the most honest thing both men ever showed the world together. But what was happening between them off-camera, in the private training sessions before the film, and in the grief that followed after it, is something that Chuck Norris spent 50 years protecting with a silence so specific it developed its own recognizable shape. The truth about their friendship. Their friendship began in 1968 at a karate tournament and deepened over approximately 2 years of private training sessions in Norris's backyard in California.
The men met at the All-American Karate Open Championships at Madison Square Garden. After that, Lee and Norris became good friends. For the next 2 years, they met up in Los Angeles to train in Lee's backyard.
Few people witnessed those sessions. The details of what passed between them have been shared by Norris across 50 years of interviews with a consistency and a carefulness that signal he knew exactly what to reveal and exactly what to protect. The technical exchange was real and specific in both directions. Lee was genuinely curious about Norris's tournament background and competitive experience. He had not come from structured competition himself, and the experience of fighting at the highest professional levels of a combat sport for an entire decade was something Lee found valuable to understand up close. In return, Norris was absorbing Lee's philosophy of adaptability and his approach to speed and practical combat. Each man was getting something real from the other. These were two fighters who made each other more complete. Norris has always acknowledged that sparring happened in those sessions. He has never allowed anyone to push him further than that. The line he has held, consistently and across every format and every decade of interviewing, is that none of it escalated into a genuine fight. He insists the exchanges never reached that intensity. He has held that position against persistent and pointed questioning without wavering once. And yet a story has circulated in martial arts communities since the 1970s that will not fully die. The account describes a full-contact private encounter between Lee and Norris that took place not in the backyard and not on a film set, but somewhere private, in a hallway, unplanned, at full contact, with no cameras and no audience. The account is specific enough to be genuinely difficult to dismiss as pure invention. It is also unverifiable by any external source. Norris has never confirmed it. He has also, notably, never completely killed it, which is a meaningful choice from a man who is otherwise extremely direct when he decides to be. Bruce Lee's famous public statement that fighting renowned martial artists, including Joe Louis, Mike Stone, and Chuck Norris, felt like fighting children has been analyzed in martial arts communities for over 50 years. Dan Inosanto, Lee's closest training partner and the person who understood the full range of what Lee was capable of better than almost anyone, has described in interviews how statements of that kind were part of the psychological architecture Lee had built around his public identity. The relentless projection of total supremacy was inseparable from a deep and genuine need to be believed in and validated. It was armor as much as it was arrogance. The two things were impossible to cleanly separate. Bruce Lee died on July 20th, 1973. He was 32 years old. He was found unconscious in Hong Kong and could not be revived. The official cause was cerebral edema, triggered by an adverse reaction to a painkiller called Equagesic. The circumstances of that evening have generated serious and sustained dispute among medical professionals, investigators.
Bruce Lee died on July 20th, 1973. Thousands of his fans gathered at Hong Kong funeral parlor just to see their hero for one last time.
And people who knew him well for over 50 years, and a fully settled account has never emerged. What is not disputed is what Bruce Lee's death meant for Chuck Norris personally. He had lost the one person who had directly created the trajectory of his entire film career. Without that phone call from Hong Kong, without the role of Colt, without the Colosseum sequence and the visibility it produced, the path from world karate champion to Hollywood action star was neither obvious nor guaranteed. Lee had seen something specific in him, acted on that belief with his own film and his own money, and then died at 32 before either of them had lived through the full consequences of what they had built together. Norris spoke about Lee in interviews as recently as the 2020s, with admiration that never performed itself. He called the Colosseum sequence the greatest fight scene ever put on film. He said working with Lee was one of the great privileges of his life. He praised Lee's speed, precision, and intelligence without competition or hedging in any direction across any decade of interviewing. After 50 years, the admiration never dimmed. It settled into something permanent, the way genuine gratitude does when a person understands exactly how different their life would have looked without one specific person choosing to believe in them. After Bruce Lee was gone, Chuck Norris had to build the rest of his life without the person who had opened its most important door. And what he built in those years included enormous professional success, and also a series of private earthquakes that his audiences never knew about, and that he kept quiet for as long as he possibly could. The life he built, the legacy he leaves. The 1980s confirmed everything the Colosseum sequence had suggested about Chuck Norris as a screen presence. Missing in Action opened at #1 at the American box office in 1984 and launched a franchise built around the specific American anxiety about soldiers left behind in Vietnam, a subject Norris chose not accidentally. Code of Silence, in 1985, gave him his best critical reception. The Delta Force in 1986 became a significant international hit. Walker, Texas Ranger ran on CBS from 1993 to 2001 for 9 seasons and remains one of the most watched programs in syndication. He was not the most critically celebrated action star of his era, but he was the most consistent, and he built that consistency the same way he had built everything else: methodically, honestly, and without shortcuts. But the professional story and the private story ran on different tracks, and the private track had turbulence that the posters never showed. There was a daughter named Dina, born in the early 1960s from a relationship outside his first marriage. Dina grew up without knowing her father. She found him later in life as an adult. Chuck acknowledged her publicly and welcomed her into his family without hesitation or legal maneuvering. She is listed alongside her sons, Mike and Eric, as his children. The fact that he handled this with openness rather than denial says something specific about the values he had built his life around. His first wife, Diane Holchek, had been his high school sweetheart, married in December 1958 while he was still in his Air Force uniform. They built a family across 30 years, raising Mike and Eric through the lean studio years and the disorienting years of rising fame. The marriage ended in divorce in 1988. Norris has always spoken about Diane with consistent respect and without assigning blame in any direction. She passed away in December 2025, just months before Chuck himself died. He lost his first wife and then followed her less than 4 months later. His meeting with Gina O'Kelly happened in 1997 in the way that real things actually happen, accidentally. He noticed her while he was at dinner with someone else. She appeared on the Walker, Texas Ranger set the following morning, and he asked her out before the day was over. They married in 1998. In 2001, at 61 years old, he became a father again when Gina gave birth to twins, son Dakota and daughter Danalee. His social media in his later years was a steady stream of tributes to her, written publicly and without irony. For their 23rd anniversary, he posted a photograph of them together and wrote, "My love, my life, my best friend, my world." That was not a performance. That was the actual account of his life. In 2017, Gina underwent routine MRI scans and was administered a contrast dye called gadolinium. She developed severe neurological symptoms, a burning sensation throughout her body, cognitive fog she called toxic confusion, and was airlifted to the Mayo Clinic in Arizona for 3 weeks of intensive treatment. Chuck did not leave the hospital. In 2018, the couple filed a lawsuit against 11 pharmaceutical companies seeking $10 million, arguing that the gadolinium had been deposited permanently in her tissues and organs, including her brain, and that the manufacturers had known about this risk and failed to warn patients. The lawsuit was settled out of court under sealed terms.
Actor Chuck Norris and his wife Gina are now suing several medical companies after they say that she was poisoned by a drug used during a routine MRI scan.
What the settlement could not seal was what those 3 weeks in Arizona did to him. He spoke about it publicly with a rawness that nothing in his film career had produced. He said watching Gina suffer was the hardest thing he had ever experienced in his life. His political voice was loud and consistent and made the Hollywood establishment uncomfortable, which bothered him less than it would have bothered most people in his position. He was openly and specifically a born-again Christian and spoke about his faith not as a brand identity, but as the actual operating system of his daily decisions. He supported Ronald Reagan. He was outspoken about conservative causes. He told reporters what he actually believed and did not calculate the career cost first. His activism around the POW and MIA issue, the question of American soldiers still unaccounted for after Vietnam, was sustained and specific across decades. He lobbied, he testified, he used his name to keep the issue visible when the political will to pursue it was fading. His brother Wieland had died in Vietnam. The cause was never abstract for him and never could be. He launched the Kick Drugs Out of America Foundation in 1990, rebranded it as Kickstart Kids with Gina in 2003, and by 2023, the program had reached over 100,000 young people through karate training designed to build the character and discipline that unstable home environments fail to provide. He said in interviews that what he witnessed in those kids meant more to him than anything the film career had produced. Given that the film career produced decades of box office success and a globally recognized name, that is a statement worth sitting with. When the Chuck Norris internet meme phenomenon arrived in the mid-2000s and turned him into a joke about supernatural toughness, he responded with genuine humor. He appeared in commercials that played with the jokes. He wrote about the phenomenon with self-awareness. He said the memes had introduced him to an entire generation that had never watched his films. And he found that funny rather than diminishing. The security required to find your own mythology amusing is not a small thing. It comes from knowing very clearly who you actually are. Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris spent their lives proving the same thing. That discipline, when taken seriously enough, becomes something that outlasts the person who practiced it. Between them, they changed what the world believed was possible for a human body. Lee redefined speed, philosophy, and the idea that a fighter should never stop questioning what he knows. Norris redefined persistence, proving that a man who loses repeatedly and keeps returning can eventually become unbeatable. Two completely different approaches to the same truth. They met, trained together, made one legendary film, and then life separated them. Lee died at 32. Norris lived to 86. But the impact they left on martial arts, on cinema, on the millions of people who watched them and picked up their first pair of training gloves because of what they saw, does not belong to either man individually. It belongs to both of them together. Lee became the philosopher of the two, the man whose quotes about water and empty cups are still shared daily by people who have never watched a single one of his films. Norris became the symbol of the two, the man whose name became shorthand for toughness in a way that crossed every language and every culture. Neither image is fully accurate. Lee was more flawed and more human than the philosophy suggests. Norris was more thoughtful and more vulnerable than the symbol allows. But together, the image they created of what a martial artist could be and what a life built around discipline could look like gave the world something it genuinely needed. That does not go away when the people behind it do. That is what legacy actually means. Now you know who Chuck Norris actually was. We want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us what you remember about him, what he meant to you, and whether you think the world will ever see someone like him again. Because after everything you just heard, that is not a question with an easy answer.